yeah, as soon as you get into that space of there's already too many of X, Y, and Z, you're kind of missing the point that people come to connect with you, not to connect with your recipe or not to connect with like whatever topic it is that you're talking about your podcast. They're here to connect with you.
Hey, my feel good friend. Oh man, I am so excited to share this week's interview with you because I am chatting with the amazing Lauren Wrighton about one of my favorite topics, podcasting. My podcast has just been so awesome for me this year. I have seen so many amazing results and I have just truly enjoyed showing up for you guys. And so today I'm chatting with Lauren about why you should consider possibly starting a podcast for your brand, how you can do it in the best way. And we even dive into how you could possibly make a little bit of money on the side if you wanted to manage other people's podcasts. Today's conversation is chock full of so much information and me geeking out, let's be honest. And so if you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed making it for you, I would love to ask you to share it to your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag me at Feel Good Social and Lauren at Lauren Wrighton so that we can see and spread the love right back to you. Are you ready for this? Let's dive in. Hey friend, and welcome to the Feel Good Social Podcast. I'm your host, Kinsey, and I'm here to help you market your business in a genuine way that works without wasting your precious time. On this show, we chat about social media strategy and mindset tips with a focus on, you guessed it, feeling good. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some genuine conversation for the good of your biz. Have you been struggling to keep everything in your business organized? If so, that was me, my friend, and I feel your pain. When I started my business, I was investing in multiple softwares. I had to-do lists all over the place, and I really struggled to keep myself and my projects on task. And then I found HoneyBook. Literally, you can do all of the things with HoneyBook. It's what I use to organize my projects and to send out all of the proposals, contracts, invoices, all of the things. And it's just been such a lifesaver for me. So if you are feeling the pain of all of that, if you've been looking for a one-stop software that will help you do all of the back-end things for your business, I would love for you to check out HoneyBook. And guess what? I've been using it long enough that HoneyBook actually has sent me a discount code to share with you. If you go to feelgoodsocial.com/honeybook, then you can find out more about this amazing software that I use every day in my business. And you can grab 50% off your first year. You better bet that that's how I started using HoneyBook. And so I'm so excited to share this discount with you. Just head to feelgoodsocial.com/honeybook. That's where you can sign up for your free trial of the software to see if it's right for you and grab 50% off your first year if you decide to sign up. How awesome is that? Just head to feelgoodsocial.com/honeybook for all the nerdy deets. All right, let's dive into the episode. Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much for joining us, lady. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I already introduced you a little bit in the intro, but I would love to hear from your own mouth. Who are you? What do you do? And who do you serve?
Yes. So my name is Lauren, and I am a podcast producer, and I now help freelancers become podcast managers. That's kind of where I've taken my business in the last year. But prior to that, I was serving clients one-on-one. Mainly, I was working with female business coaches to launch and manage their podcast. So basically anything podcast, I have my hands in at this point, because now I have my own podcast about being a podcast manager. It's like so many podcasting things.
Podcast on podcast on podcast.
Yeah. So that's what I do. Part-time hours is what I work. And then the other times I am a mom and a wife. So I have 3 little girls, 4, 2, and 6 months. And so I balance between talking about podcasting and talking about toddler and baby things with my girls.
Yeah. Oh man, I love that. Wow, that is a handful too, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're fun. They're a fun group.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. And I am so kind of
selfishly excited to talk to you because, as I told you before, I just started my podcast this year and still getting the hang of it, getting into the groove of everything. But I honestly believe I have seen so many awesome results from my podcast, just connecting with new people and all of those things. And I love it. And so I do think podcasting is an awesome opportunity for entrepreneurs of any sort. So I'd love to ask you, why do you think entrepreneurs should be starting podcasts now? And is there anyone specifically who should or shouldn't be considering podcasting?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to should you be considering a podcast, the first thing you want to think about is if you already have an audience or you have whoever you want to serve in your mind, if you haven't really started anything yet, are they listening to podcasts? Or are they someone that likes to read blogs? Or are they someone that loves watching videos? So thinking of that first is, okay, is my audience already listening to podcasts? Because if they're already on the podcasting train, it's going to be a lot easier for you to grow your listeners. But you also have to really love it. And what I've found is that people that talk to me, want to talk about podcasting, they're so jazzed up about it that you can feel that energy, that positivity around podcasting that is one thing that makes you a really great podcasting host. But you also asked, what are some of the benefits of starting a podcast? And I think one thing that is really obvious is that you can get your message out, right? You can just talk into a mic and you can get all your feelings out. But also having a podcast really grows your authority for whatever topic it is that you're talking about. So if you have a business and you're wanting to add a podcast to it, then that can really help your authority and help you to network with the people that you interview, or, it helps you get onto other podcasts so you can get in front of a different audience. There's just a lot of really amazing networking opportunities. But let's say that you're the type of person that you want to start more of a hobby podcast. This is how I got started. A friend and I was working in health and fitness, and we started a health and fitness podcast back in 2016. And we didn't have a business. We didn't have a specific way that we wanted to monetize the podcast, but we knew, hey, let's just start a podcast, see where it takes us. So that could also be you. And the benefits of doing that is getting in front of an audience and seeing okay, where can this take you? Can this start a business? And you just might be doing it for fun.
Oh man, I love this. And I'm totally going to geek out in this episode. I can tell already because I'm just talking about podcasting. Wonderful. One of the things I have just loved with my podcast too, like you said, is it establishes authority, but also it's kind of helpful for that networking aspect where it kind of gives me the opportunity to chat with all of these people who I've never, would have had the opportunity to chat with before. And having a podcast is valuable, something valuable you can offer in that collaboration space as well, right? Offering someone an interview on a podcast is so valuable for them. And so it's kind of one of those, bartering tools, I guess, when it comes to collaboration too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you have this platform. Once you start your own podcast, you have this powerful platform, whether you have, 100 listeners showing up, which is a small number to us, when really, I always think when I talk to people about stats, I always say okay, if you were to go into a room and you had 100 people show up to listen to you talk for 30 to 45 minutes, well, number one, you might be super nervous about that because, you're on stage, but that's, you would be impressed by that number probably. But then whenever we think of 100 listeners or 100 Instagram followers, we think, oh, that's such a small number. But whenever you start your podcast, whether you have those 100 listeners or you have, 1,000, 10,000 listeners, you have this powerful platform to invite people on. Like you said, it's such a great bartering tool. And there's a lot of positive collaborations where you can collaborate with someone, but then they're also bringing their expertise to your audience. So you're serving your audience really well while networking.
Yes. Yeah. I love it. And exactly what you said. I know it's sometimes hard. I don't know if you feel this way with your podcast, but seeing that number, 100, 200 listeners, 1,000 listeners, hopefully I get there someday. But just seeing that number, it's interesting to think of those people as individuals. And I think when it comes to social media, a lot of times, there's that interaction, that immediate, direct interaction. Whereas the podcast listeners, it just looks like a number a lot of times. So I'm always so overjoyed when someone reaches out to me that I'm I didn't know you were listening. That's wonderful,
Yeah, I think like that, and the anonymity of having a podcast, you see that number. So you see like 103, and you're like, who are these people? Like, who is all of the 103? And I think that helps us be really raw and real in the podcast. We sit down with our mics and we just kind of talk as if we're talking to a friend, which is what you should do. But then you meet through Instagram or wherever, usually the person that's listening, and you're like, oh, so you're the one that's been listening to all my thoughts as I sit down in front of my mic. So I think there's a great thing about that is like it helps you be a little bit more vulnerable because you're not standing in front of the room of the people, you're in their ears.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about this a little bit because I'm so interested to get your opinion, just working with several podcasters and all that stuff. How do you feel about the vulnerability when it comes to the podcasting space? And I guess like maybe editing the shows, like, have you seen any trends of like, do we need to edit all of the breaths out, all of the ums out, or is it becoming a little bit more raw lately? Or
Yeah, this is such a great question. I think that podcasting by nature is a more raw, personal, authentic platform because when you're listening, you're in the person's ears. And there's just something so intimate about that. But as far as like, what should we be editing, that kind of thing, as a podcast manager, I love editing out heavy breaths, but there's such a balance. And it's, if I'm speaking to a podcast editor, when you start, you usually over edit. And you edit out everything, and then you did that, and then over time you start to feel the balance of, okay, I'm not editing out so that things are perfect, because that's not the goal. The goal isn't to like splice sentences together so we sound really smart. The goal is to take away things that are distracting. So because you're only experiencing a podcast through your ears, it's actually easier to detect, tongue clicks and heavy S's and things that us podcast managers might notice. And of course, we're geeking out about these things.
Yeah.
Like a podcaster doesn't necessarily need to, but we're just trying to remove things that are distracting so that you have a better experience as a listener. So my goal isn't ever to make it sound perfect. It's just to make the experience the best.
Yeah, I love that distinction. And honestly, too, so I'm a big Liz Gilbert fan. I don't know if you follow her at all. And so I've been like just geeking out. Like this year, for some reason, her voice is like comforting to me. I'm like, okay, this lady is just like relaxed. I want to listen to her and all this uncertainty. And so I've been listening to a lot of her podcast interviews, like from back in the day up to now. And it's so funny. She does this thing where she laughs and she takes this huge gulp of air. And as like a podcast editor myself, I'm like listening to it. I'm like, ooh, that's something I would probably edit out because it's distracting. But it's like such a part of Liz as her like person. And I actually listened to one episode where I could tell it was really, really edited just because I've listened to so many interviews with her. And they were taking out those big gulps. And I was like, this doesn't sound right. It sounds a little robotic. So I'm still trying to find that like, medium. I definitely over edited when I was like starting out. Now I'm trying to figure out what's the healthy balance of all that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because we think that, maybe we go live on Instagram and we think like we go watch it back. If you're even brave enough to do that. I don't watch myself whenever I go live. I'm like, it is into the ethers. It will exist there. You can see me as I am. But we think that we need to edit out. Like I say like a lot and I'm like, that's just who I am. And honestly, if I want to change that, I need to change that by not saying it, not post-production, but that's also just how I talk. So, it just self-acceptance over time. I've just like, you know what? That's who I am. But you're right. Like we all have these idiosyncrasies in the way that we talk. And it's actually a way that we can kind of bond with one another. Liz by this big ol' laugh and this gulp of air, which actually a lot of people do. I know exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, you might think that it needs to be edited out, but really it's like, you're just actually getting to know her through the way that she talks. I love that about podcasting.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Oh man. Okay. Definitely geeking out right now. I love just chatting about this stuff. But can you share a few of your favorite tips for people who are just starting out, maybe thinking about starting a podcast and what they need to do first? Yeah.
So I would say if you're in the stage of you've been wanting to start a podcast and you're like, I don't know how this would actually go. Like, how do I actually do it? Well, there's two routes that you can take. You can take the YouTube route where you can learn, through YouTube for free. That's what I did back in 2016 with my friend. Totally possible. But you can also hire someone. And I say that, number one, because I'm a podcast manager and I teach this, but also because it really can be so helpful just moving that roadblock out of the way, right? If you're just like, this seems so big, then investing a couple $100, that's just a ballpark, then you can just get your podcast out there, and you can just even hire someone for the launching of it. If you want to learn kind of the ongoing management, you can take that on. But I love just opening everyone's eyes to say that if the tech side is a huge roadblock, then just hire it out so that you can get out there. But it is possible to learn. So if you're like just loving podcasting and you want to learn it, it's totally possible through the bunch of DIY routes like YouTube. But once you're out there and once you've launched, a lot of people know that consistency is the name of the game. You want to release whatever day it is that you release. You want to release on that day consistently so that your listeners know that you're going to show up, so that they will also show up for you. And we talked a little bit about stats, but I would say expect the low numbers. Don't be disappointed whenever you see that you're starting with 50 listeners. You have to start somewhere, and those 50 listeners are probably so into what you're saying that they'll then spread it to their friends and family members that are interested in the same topic. So those are the two things I would say is, if the tech side is just going to keep you from doing it, hire it out, and then expect to start with a low number, especially if let's say you have 10K followers on Instagram. You're not going to pull, 8,000 over to your podcast. That just isn't the way that podcasting works. Your podcast listeners are going to be really your best followers. So it's going to be a fraction of whoever's following you on social media.
Yeah. Oh man. So many things to unpack there. I feel like when it comes to the number, especially too, it's just bringing it back to remembering that these people, these like 100 people are going to be your most intimate followers. Like you said, like they're getting to know you. You are in their ear every week and they feel like they're becoming friends with you. And so these people are much more likely to actually support you versus the 10,000 followers on Instagram who might be, 25% robots or something like that. Because these are real people listening to your podcast and getting to know you. I love that. Also, I would love to touch a little bit on consistency, because this is something that I've found really, really interesting in my first year of podcasting. I listened to a lot of those big marketing podcasts, Jenna Kutcher, Amy Porterfield. Those are the two names that come to mind. And whenever I was starting my podcast, especially I remember Jenna Kutcher at one point in one of her podcasts saying, I have never missed a week of my podcast. It is so, so important to be consistent every day, release the same, like an episode every week. And she's like, in 3 years. And so in my head, I was listening to this. I was like, okay, Jenna, okay, I'm going to do this every week. It's like the biggest deal in the world and all of those things. And, I went through this process this year of, trying to do it all myself, which let me say real quick, I probably should have hired someone to help me launch my podcast. I was one of those learn it yourselfers, and it would have been so worth the investment to like have someone help me. But I was like, okay, we got to do this every week. Consistency is so key. I was staying up until 2 a.m. editing my podcast. And my business coach was like, lady, it's okay to miss a week. That's an executive decision that you have to make. Your listeners will still be there next week. It's okay. And so I have missed a few weeks. And I'm wondering what you think about this consistency and if, I guess, like the importance of it and all that.
Yeah. Well, I think that, these people with huge teams that say like, I've never missed a podcast episode ever. It's like, yeah, well, that's because you probably, they have a system. And so it's not to like say you're different, Jenna Kutcher, which she is. She's different because she has a team, a bigger team than, you and I probably have. But, I think there's 2 different ways to kind of think about this. Number one, don't stay up till 2 a.m. maybe. Don't beat yourself up if you have to miss a week. Like, number one, this is your business. This is your podcast. You have to make those executive decisions, like you said. And if you're missing, 1 out of, let's say, 10 weeks, your listeners will 100% still be there. I
Yeah.
think though it's more about your commitment level. If you're thinking like, "Oh, I want to start a podcast," but you're already like not committed to showing up every week, that is when you need to
Mm-hmm.
ask yourself, "Okay, should I just release every other week?" So people have great success doing two different routes, doing every other week, that's popular, or doing seasons where you batch record, let's say 9 episodes, and you have 9 weeks of content, and then you take a break. So for some people where maybe their business is cyclical, or they're a mom, so they have kids home during the summer, and they're like, the summer is crazy. I'm not even messing with the summer. I'm just going to have a season, September through, let's say, April, and then I take a break. Even that's consistent, so whatever pattern it is that you think that you can stick to when you start, that's what I would recommend. But yeah, don't beat yourself up about missing a week. Definitely not. I would say though, like, let your listeners know on social media, say, hey, you guys are going to go there and look for an episode today, but there's nothing going to be there. So I'll be back next week. I needed to take a breather, or we had technical difficulties, or whatever it is. But you can batch record to kind of avoid those situations, but they happen, and we're all human, and it's best when we show up as a human and not as the 2 a.m. version of ourselves anyway.
Yeah, that was the point when my business coach was like, Kinsey, let's talk about this. Yeah, for sure. It's I think I told you this before we started recording, but I'm okay with like recording things. I have interviews out the wazoo. It's the editing part of it. So I think that I probably do need to invest in some help soon for sure. But exactly like what you said, whenever I've missed a week, I've usually made a post on Instagram just saying, hey, this week has gotten crazy because #life of 2020. But like, here are some other episodes that you can go back and listen to. Here's some more popular episodes, that sort of thing, for sure. Okay, I would love to know, what do you think is like the biggest mistake that you see people making when they're starting out their podcast? Is there anything that pops out to you?
Yes, let's see. I would say comparing the numbers. So that's the biggest thing, but we kind of already talked about that. Yeah, just if you get into like a podcast-based Facebook networking group, just don't.
Yeah, no.
Okay, maybe you should. But I just see all the time people saying like, oh, I only have 1,000 listeners. I'm like, you have 1,000 listeners. Like, build off of that. Go with that. But I guess my other thing would be promotion. So that's one of the biggest questions that I get is like, how do I promote my podcast? My podcast isn't growing as fast as I want it to. So consistency with promoting is really important, but the number one way that podcasts grow is through referral, which is pretty crazy with the internet being a thing. Podcasts still grow from like me recommending a podcast to you. So that means that you have to serve your current audience really well so that they'll spread the word about your podcast. So, they can do that by writing reviews, giving you ratings, sharing on social media, just literally telling their family and friends. So I recommend, to the podcaster to ask their audience, hey, will you tell someone else about the show so it can grow, so we can serve more people? Literally ask them, because they love you. That's why they're showing up every week. So they're going to do that. They're going to think of anyone that would benefit from the topic and share it, versus trying to do, some sort of big strategy, maybe on Instagram or something. I say work in those small numbers to grow your podcast, but also let everyone know when you have a new episode out. Don't avoid social media, do that. But and you can also find ideal listeners on Instagram by doing, engagement work and things like that. But don't forget to serve your current audience really well.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the end of it. Like, that's how I listen to podcasts. There's so many podcasts out there these days, and it takes a good time commitment to try one out, to try out a new one, right? And so if a friend tells me, hey, you need to listen to this one, I'm much more likely to take that action versus even that same friend just sharing it to their Instagram stories, right? If they're like telling me directly, like, hey, this is for you, then I'm much more likely to take that action. And that's kind of what I bring into the social media as well. When I teach social media, it's like, if you can like reach out to people directly and just speak to them in the DMs and make one person feel seen and heard and loved and valued, like that is worth so much more. Like, that action is so much more valuable and so much more compelling than like a grand, broad, action or call to action.
Yeah. And I think with the internet and being so connected, it makes us think like, oh, I can talk to all of these people. We're connected to hundreds and thousands of people. But really, social media is great for connecting one-on-one with people. So yeah, reaching out to people in their DMs and just connecting through like writing comments and reacting to stories. And just, yeah, I love the one-on-one individual work that you can do.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any other just tips for marketing a podcast? Just, kind of selfishly ask it over here.
Yeah, no, I love this stuff. So I say fresh marketing is always like my go-to. So I think what everyone has been kind of doing leading up to now is having like templated posts that they like just plug and play their new podcast episode. And we all know that like once you've seen something a couple times, you start saying, oh, okay, that's the podcast. I'm going to just ignore it. Even if you love the podcast, you just ignore it because you see this template. So what I'm playing around with now with my clients and also with my podcast is altering with a couple different ideas for social media so that it looks fresh, but you can still systematize it, but it looks fresh each time. So playing with audiograms, but also, changing things up week by week so that it still catches people's eye and they'll still look at the topic and think, okay, I have to listen to this episode this week.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Oh, okay. Can we talk about cover art a little bit? Because I'm actually working with a designer to maybe design a fresh new look for the podcast. And so I'd love to hear your just thoughts on cover art. What's necessary? What should we stay away from?
Yes. So I love how so many different types of cover art actually work. In the business coaching space that I'm in, you see a lot of of someone's face and the topic. That's what you see. And it's very clean. There's not a lot going on. But I also have seen like really amazing, I don't want to say intricate, but more creative, let's say, cover art that really works. But the key is that you want things to be big because you're only seeing it in a thumbnail. You're only seeing it in this small image. So if you have small text or just small graphics, they just blend in and you can't really see what is actually going on. So it needs to be minimalist and it needs to have just the right amount of info. In a cover art, you don't need to say what the show is about. That's a mistake that I see is you just need to have the title and your name perhaps, and then some sort of image that's going to be striking to the eye.
Okay, awesome. I'm so glad we talked about that. Okay, I have kind of a random question for you, but you started your podcast, or your first podcast back in 2016. And I'm just wondering, this has been kind of just on my mind, in the back of my mind. How has podcasting changed in that time span? Has it become easier at all? Because right now it was honestly, there was a lot to starting my podcast, of course, but I couldn't imagine starting it back in 2016. I'm assuming that technology has gotten better.
Oh yeah. There's just so many more podcasting tools out there. Like you and I were using Squadcast to record this. Squadcast, from my knowledge, didn't exist in 2016. And actually my friend and I that started the podcast, we went to the conference podcast movement last August of 2019. And just looking at all the vendors, it was like, wow, I knew that the podcasting industry had just bloomed, but just seeing all of these companies that specifically serve podcasting was pretty mind blowing. So I'd say it's gotten easier because of all of these different tools, but I think it still has so far to go. We're just steadily inclining on this boom because, getting stats on your podcast is still not the easiest thing to do. There's still a lot of improvements that I see that they can make. And now, Spotify has really taken on podcasting this year. So the fact that it's not just Apple dominating the space, and now we have Spotify, and of course there's others, Google, Stitcher, all of those. But now that another huge company has taken on podcasting and sees the value in it, I can just see things just exploding from here.
Yeah, people talk about how podcasting, there's so many podcasts out there already, how can I compete, all of these things, but think about blogging even, there are so many blogging and it's still going strong. And when it comes to the podcasting space, so much room for improvement. I think Apple Podcasts just started doing analytics within the Podcast Connect recently, right? I just started seeing that. It's like in the beta still.
Yeah, and they're not very accurate. So
Yeah.
it's annoying to me.
I know, yeah.
But yeah, how you compare it to blogging, so do I. I love comparing podcasting to blogging because number one, they're two different audiences in my opinion, but you can see how blogging started and boomed and see how podcasting is doing the same thing. There's still, for every podcast, there's 5 blogs. And it's like, okay, think of all the food blogs out there. Do we really need another food blog? Well, not really, but like it's all about who's behind the food blog and who's behind the podcast. So yeah, as soon as you get into that space of there's already too many of X, Y, and Z, you're kind of missing the point that people come to connect with you, not to connect with your recipe or not to connect with like whatever topic it is that you're talking about your podcast. They're here to connect with you.
And it's the same, like that is the core of marketing, isn't it? Just like putting yourself into your business. There's so many businesses out there. There's so many blogs, so many podcasts, all those things. Like exactly, you are the best part of all of that. You are the reason that people are going. And so you need to put yourself in it. That's what I preach. It's so funny because I just started listening to My Favorite Murder. Have you heard that one?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm like not really, I wouldn't call myself a true crime fan or anything like that, but someone recommended it on another podcast I was listening to. They were like saying how funny the ladies were. I was like, I want something just easy. I'll give it a try. And now I listen, not necessarily for like hearing about the true crime murders, but more so just like hear these ladies crack jokes together. Feel like I'm a part of their conversation and whatnot.
Yeah. No, people always recommend those true crime podcasts to me because I always ask people like, what's your favorite podcast? Which is the worst question to ask a podcast fan. By the way, I need to stop doing it. But people always recommend murder ones to me. And I actually started listening to podcasts through Serial. When Serial first launched, which is like a really popular, it's not a true crime. It's more just like an interesting story. But the first one was about a murder. So I actually got into podcast listening through that. I want to say that was back in 2014 when Serial came out. But yeah, I'm such a wimp that I cannot listen. And then now, like the older I get, the more I'm like, no, I cannot listen to murder stuff. So as like, I have the best intention of maybe listening to those one day, but not right now.
Yeah, I know. I'm even like, why am I listening to that? But the ladies are like just so funny. Yeah. And honestly, they have these like mini episodes where the mini episodes are more my favorite than like their longer episodes where they really go into detail of like a murder story or something, because the mini episodes are their fans writing into them to share dorky stories. And a lot of times it's like family history, like my grandma decided to like whatever, like I don't know, it's the mini episodes are funny. But yeah, okay, sidetrack.
But once again, it's them. What you were saying, it's them that you're showing up for. You're not really showing up for the murder, you're showing up for the hosts because they're killing it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man. Okay. I love this. So I would love to talk about podcast managing a little bit, because you have kind of more so shifted into that space of teaching people how to become podcast managers. Do you think that this is a full-time job, a part-time job, and like, how do people start to do that? I guess multi questions.
Yeah. So it can be a full-time job or a part-time job. I teach how to become a podcast manager working less than 20 hours a week. So part-time is my jam because that's what I do. But there's actually a lot of like podcasting jobs that are full-time that these big platforms are looking for help. I see one at least once a week. There's a job posting through Apple, through Stitcher, through these big platforms. So that's definitely possible. But my jam is part-time. Because I mean, number one, I could only imagine like editing for like 8 hours straight. Your eyeballs would be like coming out of your skull. But I'm sure there's a way to manage that if you were doing this full time. But there's so much opportunity in doing it part-time. One of the reasons, because producing a podcast is just like kind of a machine. The client, they record the podcast, you get the audio, you edit, you produce, you upload, you write show notes, maybe you book guests, you create social media graphics. There's all of these things that have to be done before the episode goes live. And back whenever I started as a podcast manager, I had these 2 young girls and I didn't want to be away from them during the day. And I am horrible at multitasking. I cannot multitask. So I wasn't going to be editing podcasts while they're running around my feet. I only wanted to do it at night. So I was working from 7 p to 10 p each night, and I could produce a whole podcast episode in those 3 hours. And I didn't have to do a lot of back and forth communication with the client. So it's such a cool job opportunity that you can have, and you can kind of package up and say, okay, I can fit this into my life, because it doesn't have to take over my life, but it can also fuel, all of the, like, I love it. I have a huge passion for it. So it can fuel you in that way, but it can also stay as a part-time job.
Yeah. And I love that. I love talking about this, especially, this year with 2020, so much uncertainty. A lot of us are looking for a little extra income boost here or there. And so it's so awesome to think, how hard would it be for someone to learn all of the skills and stuff? I know that you have an online course, don't you, for like teaching people how to do all this? Like, how much time until people can actually maybe start making money from that?
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I have a course that teaches all the skills. So there's that route. That's like kind of, your fast track path, but you can do it DIY as well. I don't want to pretend like the only way you can do this is by taking my course, which, yeah, I think there's certain people want to dabble first and see, okay, do I like this? Maybe you want to go that route. But if you're teaching yourself, I would say, I don't really know how long it'll take you, maybe a month or two, navigating it and landing clients. The students in my podcast manager program, they will take the course. It's about 10 hours of material, like 10 to 15 hours of material. So they can get through it definitely within a month. And then they're ready. Like they'll practice editing. We actually have a certificate process inside of my program where they'll send their audio that they've edited, and then we'll give them feedback, especially for people that like they want that kind of stamp of approval that you're ready, you can do this, you can land clients. That's kind of why we put this into place. But yeah, they'll get through the program usually on average within 2 weeks, because they're excited, they want to get this going, and they've made an investment, so they're like, okay, let's turn this around, and they'll land clients. The long period is 3 months, but people land clients within that first month, or this, the first 2 months. For the first 3 months is really what we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Everyone go take Lauren's course and then come back to me and I'll hire you as my podcast manager. Oh man, lady, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I'd love to chat about like your journey as an entrepreneur a little bit. Can you share just maybe one of like those big things that you've struggled with and kind of how you've worked through it or something? Because I know that as entrepreneurs, we all have those big challenges that we've come up to.
Yeah. So I kind of got bit by the entrepreneurial bug back in 2012. I joined an MLM and I loved it for a couple months and realized, you know what, this isn't for me. It was a little bit too sales driven for me. I hated that feeling of like the end of the month where I was like, no, but I really wanted to sell 5 shakes and I only sold 4. Like I just didn't like that pressure. So, but I loved the idea of working for myself. I loved I was introduced to the online space. So I loved that. So I was like, okay, there's something here. So I quit the MLM after a couple of months and I tried a couple different things. Back then I was vegan for 4 years. So I tried to like record vegan food blog. I tried a couple different things, all fell flat. I joined this big expensive marketing course. Thankfully, my brand new husband was on board with that. I don't really know why or how I convinced him into making that investment. But all of that to say is I tried a lot of things. Most of it did not work early on. That was in 2012. I didn't start my business until I didn't start my profitable business until 2016, whenever we started this podcast with my friend. So that's been the longevity of my story has been the biggest challenge for me, is just sticking with it and knowing, there was something here, even though I had to continue to pivot and I had part-time jobs and full-time jobs during this process. I just knew there's something here. So if you're like thinking, a side hustle, that just seems like something that is for me. Try something, get out there. Number one, put your vegan blog up or whatever it is. Let yourself fail so that you can pivot and you can get to where you're going.
Yes, I love that so much. I love that advice because that's the two biggest things that I see with people is not taking action, right? Just like not doing it.
Mhm.
And then also, comparing yourself to these people who have been in the game for years, and not realizing or impatience. That's definitely what I struggle with. It's like, I want it to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh gosh, me too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, lady, I've so enjoyed talking to you. Can you please share with my audience where they can connect with you and find out more about all of your things? Because I know they'll want to do that.
Yeah. So I am most active on Instagram and my handle is Lauren Wrighton. So you can go follow me there. And I also have a free masterclass for anyone that's thinking about becoming a podcast manager. I have a masterclass that teaches you how to take those first steps to become a profitable podcast manager. And you can get your seat to that at laurenwrighton.com/masterclass.
Awesome. And I will link everything in the show notes. I think I'll probably just take your masterclass because I just want to. I love, girl, I'm kind of like a freebie hoarder a little bit, but I love it. I'm always just like, oh yes, give me all of the information. So thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. I loved our conversation. I know my listeners are going to as well.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
How awesome is Lauren, you guys? I hope that you give her a follow on Instagram. Check out that freebie because it is awesome. And once again, if you enjoyed this podcast episode as much as I did, I would love for you to share it to Instagram. Make sure you tag me at Feel Good Social and Lauren at Lauren Wrighton so that we can see it and spread the love right back to you. I hope that you have a wonderful week, my friend, and I will catch you next week. Thanks so much for listening, my friend. For show notes and a whole lot of other awesome freebies, visit feelgoodsocial.com. Simply go to feelgoodsocial.com for all the goods.